Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded subway station with the same measured pace she had maintained for the past 3 months since returning to civilian life. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black jacket that gave no hint of the extraordinary life she had left behind. The morning rush hour chaos of New York City felt both overwhelming and strangely peaceful after 12 years of coordinating military operations in some of the world's most dangerous territories. She had been adapting to this new reality slowly, finding work as a security consultant while trying to blend into the anonymous mass of commuters. The transition hadn't been easy. After years of making split-second decisions that could mean life or death for entire units, choosing what coffee to order felt absurdly complicated. But she was determined to build a normal life, whatever that meant for someone with her background. The morning had started like any other. Sarah grabbed her usual coffee from the vendor near her apartment, caught the 7:30 train, and found herself a spot near the doors where she could observe the crowd. Old habits died hard, and even in civilian clothes, she automatically scanned for potential threats, exit routes, and unusual behavior. It was an instinct that had kept her alive through countless missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and classified operations she could never discuss. As the train pulled into Grand Central, Sarah moved with the flow of passengers toward the exit. She was thinking about her meeting with a potential client when she felt someone deliberately stick their foot out in front of her. The movement was obvious and intentional, clearly meant to send her sprawling onto the concrete platform in front of hundreds of commuters. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, at least from Sarah's perspective. Her body responded before her conscious mind could process the situation. Years of combat training kicked in automatically. Instead of stumbling forward as intended, she smoothly adjusted her balance, sidestepped the obstacle, and, in one fluid motion, grabbed the person's extended leg and used their own momentum against them. The man who had tried to trip her found himself suddenly off balance, stumbling backward into a nearby pillar. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. His face showed shock and confusion as he tried to understand how his simple prank had backfired so dramatically. "What the hell?" he shouted, loud enough to draw attention from nearby commuters. His voice carried the entitled tone of someone who wasn't used to being challenged. "You can't just assault people." Sarah stopped and turned to face him, her expression calm and controlled. She had dealt with far more dangerous situations than an angry businessman on a subway platform. "You stuck your foot out to trip me," she said simply, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "I just didn't fall." The man's face reddened as he realized that several people had witnessed the entire exchange. A few commuters had stopped to watch, their phones already out and recording. In today's world, public confrontations quickly became social media content, and he seemed to suddenly realize how this might look to his colleagues or clients. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, straightening his tie and trying to regain his composure. "You attacked me for no reason. I'm calling security." Sarah studied him for a moment, noting his expensive watch, the way he held himself, and the defensive posture he had adopted. She had encountered plenty of bullies during her military career, though usually they carried weapons rather than briefcases. The psychology was often similar, though. People who used their perceived advantages to intimidate others, expecting no consequences for their actions. "Go ahead and call security," she replied calmly. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in the security camera footage showing you deliberately trying to trip a stranger." The man glanced around nervously, perhaps just realizing that the busy subway station was equipped with numerous security cameras. His bluster began to fade as he calculated the potential consequences of his actions. A harassment charge wouldn't look good on his record, especially if he worked in one of the nearby corporate offices. "Look, maybe there was just a misunderstanding," he said, his tone becoming more conciliatory. "No harm done, right? We can just forget this whole thing happened." Sarah could have walked away at that point. She could have accepted his half-hearted attempt at de-escalation and continued on to her meeting. But something about his attitude bothered her. It wasn't just the attempted trip, it was the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that he could humiliate a stranger for his own amusement without consequences. "What's your name?" she asked, pulling out her phone. The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Why do you need to know my name? Because I want to make sure this gets reported properly, Sarah replied. Attempting to trip someone on a subway platform isn't just rude, it's dangerous. Someone could have been seriously injured. My name is Marcus Webb, he said reluctantly, then seemed to regain some of his earlier confidence. I work for Henderson and Associates, one of the top law firms in the city. You really don't want to mess with me. Sarah almost smiled at that. She had faced down insurgents, navigated complex international negotiations, and coordinated operations involving thousands of personnel. A corporate lawyer's threat didn't register as particularly concerning. Henderson and Associates, she repeated, making a note on her phone. I'll make sure they know about this incident. Marcus's face went pale. Wait, you can't just call my employer. That's harassment. Is it? Sarah asked. Because attempting to trip someone seems like harassment to me. I'm just making sure the appropriate people know what kind of person they have representing their firm. The crowd around them had grown larger, with more commuters stopping to watch the confrontation. Several people were clearly recording the exchange, and Sarah could see Marcus becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. It was just a joke. People need to learn to take a joke. Funny, Sarah replied. In my experience, when someone says something was just a joke, it usually means they got called out for being cruel, and they're trying to avoid consequences. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to figure out exactly who he was dealing with. There was something about Sarah's calm demeanor and confident bearing that seemed to unnerve him. Most people, when confronted by an angry businessman in an expensive suit, would have backed down or apologized. Sarah showed no signs of intimidation whatsoever. Who are you? He asked finally. Sarah considered the question. She could have said she was a security consultant, which was technically true. She could have mentioned her military background, which would certainly explain her reaction to his attempted trip. But something made her pause. Looking at Marcus Webb, with his expensive suit and entitled attitude, Sarah realized this was exactly the kind of person she had spent years protecting. While she was coordinating dangerous operations overseas, people like him were safe in their corporate offices, never having to worry about real threats or genuine danger. The irony wasn't lost on her. I'm someone who doesn't fall down when people try to trip me, she said simply. Marcus seemed frustrated by her non-answer, but before he could respond, a transit police officer approached the group. The crowd of onlookers had grown large enough to attract official attention. What's the problem here? The officer asked, looking between Sarah and Marcus. Marcus immediately stepped forward, his lawyer instincts taking over. Officer, this woman attacked me. I was just walking to work, and she grabbed my leg and shoved me into a pillar. The officer looked at Sarah questioningly. She remained calm, her military training evident in her posture and bearing even if the officer didn't recognize it consciously. He tried to trip me, Sarah explained simply. I avoided falling, and he lost his balance. Several people witnessed the entire incident, and I'm sure the security cameras captured it as well. The officer looked around at the crowd of commuters, many of whom were nodding in confirmation of Sarah's version of events. A few people stepped forward to offer their accounts, all of which supported Sarah's story. He definitely stuck his foot out to trip her, said an elderly woman carrying a shopping bag. I saw the whole thing. She just didn't fall like he expected. It was deliberate, added a young man in a college sweatshirt. The guy in the suit was being a jerk for no reason. Marcus's face grew redder as more witnesses came forward. It was becoming clear that his version of events wasn't going to hold up under scrutiny. The transit officer turned back to Marcus. Sir, is it true that you attempted to trip this woman? It was just a prank, Marcus said defensively. I didn't mean any harm. People are making a big deal out of nothing. Attempting to trip someone on a subway platform is considered assault, the officer informed him. Even if you call it a prank, it's still illegal and dangerous. Sarah watched as the full implications of his actions began to dawn on Marcus. What he had thought would be a harmless bit of entertainment at a stranger's expense was turning into a potential criminal matter. The officer continued, I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you, and I'll be reviewing the security footage to determine exactly what happened. As they waited for the security footage to be reviewed, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been coordinating complex military operations, making decisions that affected international relations and national security. Now she was standing on a subway platform, dealing with a petty bully who thought it would be amusing to trip a stranger. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Marcus Webb probably had no idea that the woman he had tried to humiliate had spent years in situations where a moment's inattention could mean death. He had picked the wrong target for his crude joke, but he couldn't have known that when he saw what appeared to be an ordinary commuter in civilian clothes. When the security footage confirmed exactly what the witnesses had reported, the transit officer turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "Mr. Webb, you're being issued a citation for attempted assault. The footage clearly shows you deliberately trying to trip this woman. You're lucky she wasn't injured, or this could have been much more serious." Marcus accepted the citation with obvious reluctance. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. As the crowd began to disperse and normal commuter traffic resumed, he turned to Sarah one last time. "This isn't over," he said quietly, though his tone suggested more defeat than threat. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Actually, it is over. Unless you plan to make this mistake again with someone else." As Marcus walked away, clearly shaken by the morning's events, Sarah realized that her old life and her new one weren't as separate as she had thought. The skills and instincts that had served her in combat situations were still there, still protecting her, even in the mundane setting of a subway platform. She had no way of knowing that this brief encounter would lead to something much more significant, or that Marcus Webb's wounded pride would drive him to make a decision that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Marcus Webb spent the rest of that Tuesday in a state of barely controlled anger. The citation for attempted assault sat on his desk like a personal insult, a reminder of how completely his simple prank had backfired. He had been humiliated in front of dozens of strangers, recorded on multiple phones, and now faced the possibility of this incident affecting his career at Henderson and Associates. The law firm where he worked was prestigious and conservative, the kind of place where partners valued discretion and respectability above all else. A criminal citation, even for something as minor as attempted assault, could seriously damage his chances of making partner. The firm had a strict moral conduct clause in their employment agreements, and Marcus knew that several of his colleagues would be happy to see him stumble. As the day wore on, his anger began to focus more specifically on the woman who had caused his humiliation. Sarah Martinez. He had managed to get her name from one of the witnesses before the transit police had arrived. She had been so calm, so controlled, so completely unimpressed by his threats and bluster. It was as if she had dealt with far more serious situations than an angry lawyer on a subway platform. That thought bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Marcus was used to intimidating people, to using his position and connections to get what he wanted. The fact that this unknown woman had been completely unfazed by his anger suggested something about her background that made him curious and increasingly frustrated. By Thursday, Marcus had made a decision that would prove to be a serious mistake. He decided to hire a private investigator to look into Sarah Martinez's background. His reasoning was simple. If he could find something damaging about her, he might be able to turn the tables on their subway encounter. Perhaps she had a criminal record, or problems with previous employers, or some other vulnerability he could exploit. The private investigator he chose was a former police detective named Ray Coleman who had built a small, but successful business handling background checks and personal investigations for attorneys and corporations. Coleman was known for being thorough and discreet, and he had worked with Henderson and Associates on several previous cases. "I need a complete background check on someone," Marcus told Coleman during their meeting in a coffee shop near the law firm. "Name is Sarah Martinez, probably in her 30s, lives somewhere in Manhattan based on the subway line she was using." Coleman pulled out a notebook and began jotting down the information. "This is for a case the firm is working on." Marcus hesitated for just a moment. "It's related to a potential legal matter, yes." It wasn't technically a lie, though it wasn't exactly the truth either. Marcus told himself that the subway incident could potentially become a legal matter if Sarah decided to pursue harassment charges against him. He was just gathering information for his own protection. Coleman nodded and continued taking notes. "Any other details that might help narrow down the search? Approximate age, place of employment, anything like that." "She's probably around 35, maybe a little younger. Seemed physically fit, like she might work out regularly or have some kind of athletic background. Very calm under pressure, which might suggest law enforcement or military experience." Marcus paused, remembering how effortlessly Sarah had countered his attempt to trip her. Actually, I'm pretty sure she has some kind of combat or self-defense training. Interesting, Coleman said, making more notes. That actually helps quite a bit. If she has military or law enforcement background, there will be records. Give me a few days, and I'll see what I can find. What Coleman discovered over the next week was far more extensive and impressive than either he or Marcus had expected. Sarah Elena Martinez, age 34, had served in the United States Army for 12 years before retiring with the rank of lieutenant colonel just 3 months earlier. Her service record was partially classified, but the unclassified portions painted a picture of an extraordinary military career. Sarah had graduated from West Point with a degree in international relations and had been commissioned as a second lieutenant in military intelligence. She had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, had received the Bronze Star twice, and had been awarded the Legion of Merit for her final assignment. But it was that final assignment that really caught Coleman's attention. For the last 4 years of her military service, Sarah had been assigned to the Joint Special Operations Command, where she had served as a combat operations coordinator. The job description was vague, but Coleman's law enforcement background helped him read between the lines. Sarah Martinez had been responsible for planning and coordinating some of the military's most sensitive and dangerous operations. The more Coleman dug into Sarah's background, the more impressed and concerned he became. This wasn't just a former soldier trying to adjust to civilian life. This was someone who had been at the very top of the military's special operations hierarchy. Her security clearances had been at the highest levels, and her performance evaluations consistently rated her as exceptional. Even more concerning from Marcus's perspective was what Coleman found about Sarah's transition to civilian life. She had started her own security consulting firm specializing in risk assessment and crisis management for international corporations. Her client list already included several Fortune 500 companies, and she was developing a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable and capable consultants in her field. Coleman had handled hundreds of background investigations over his career, but Sarah Martinez's file was unlike anything he had seen before. This was someone who had coordinated operations involving thousands of personnel, managed multi-million-dollar budgets, and made decisions that could affect international relations and national security. When Coleman called Marcus to schedule a meeting to discuss his findings, he could hear the anticipation in the lawyer's voice. "Did you find anything useful?" Marcus asked immediately. "We need to meet in person," Coleman replied. "This is more complicated than you initially described." They met again at the same coffee shop, but this time Coleman's demeanor was noticeably different. He seemed more serious, more professional, and perhaps a little concerned. "Before I share what I found," Coleman began, "I need to ask you again, what exactly is your relationship with this woman?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I told you, it's related to a potential legal matter. Mr. Webb, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell when someone isn't being completely honest with me. Sarah Martinez isn't just some random person you're investigating for a case. What really happened between you two?" Marcus realized that Coleman's investigative instincts had probably uncovered more than just Sarah's background. He decided to tell the truth, or at least most of it. "We had an incident on the subway," he admitted. She embarrassed me in front of a lot of people. I got a citation for attempted assault. I just wanted to know who I was dealing with." Coleman stared at him for a long moment. "You tried to assault a former Army lieutenant colonel who spent 4 years coordinating special operations missions." "I didn't know who she was at the time," Marcus said defensively. "How was I supposed to know she had a military background?" Coleman opened his file folder and began spreading out documents on the table between them. "Mr. Webb, this woman spent 12 years in the Army, most of it in intelligence and special operations. She has commanded troops in combat, coordinated missions in some of the most dangerous places in the world, and earned decorations for valor and exceptional service." Marcus looked at the documents with growing unease. Sarah's military service record was impressive, but more than that, it was intimidating. This wasn't someone who would be easily bullied or manipulated. For the last 4 years, Coleman continued, she was assigned to Joint Special Operations Command as a combat operations coordinator. "Do you understand what that means?" Marcus shook his head, though he was beginning to get a very bad feeling about the answer. It means she was responsible for planning and executing some of the military's most sensitive and dangerous operations. She coordinated missions that you'll never read about in the newspapers, operations that required split-second decision-making and absolute precision. She's probably seen and done things that would give most people nightmares. Coleman closed the file folder and leaned back in his chair. Mr. Webb, I have to ask, what exactly were you planning to do with this information? I don't know, Marcus admitted. I just thought maybe there would be something I could use to level the playing field. Level the playing field? Coleman's voice carried a note of disbelief. Mr. Webb, you tried to trip a woman who spent 12 years in the military, including 4 years coordinating special operations missions. The playing field was never level to begin with. Marcus was beginning to realize that his plan to find leverage against Sarah Martinez had been not just futile, but potentially dangerous. This wasn't someone who could be intimidated or manipulated through normal means. There's something else you should know, Coleman added. Since leaving the military, she's started her own security consulting firm. Her clients include several major corporations, and she's already developing a reputation as one of the best in her field. She's not just some unemployed veteran trying to figure out civilian life. She's building a successful business based on her military experience and expertise. Coleman gathered up the documents and put them back in the folder. My professional advice? Forget about whatever happened on the subway and move on with your life. Sarah Martinez isn't someone you want as an enemy. But Marcus's wounded pride and growing frustration were making it difficult for him to think rationally. The more impressive Sarah's background became, the more humiliated he felt about their subway encounter. How had he misjudged the situation so completely? What if I wanted to cause problems for her business? He asked. Hypothetically. Coleman stared at him. Mr. Webb, that would be an incredibly bad idea. This woman has connections throughout the military and intelligence communities. She's worked with people who specialize in dealing with threats, both foreign and domestic. Trying to sabotage her business wouldn't just be unethical, it would be potentially dangerous for you. But there must be something, Marcus insisted. Some weakness, some vulnerability. Nobody is perfect. Coleman considered this for a moment. There is one thing, he said reluctantly. Her transition to civilian life hasn't been entirely smooth. She's been seeing a therapist who specializes in helping veterans adjust to civilian careers. It's not uncommon for people with her background to struggle with the change from military to civilian life. Marcus leaned forward, interested. What kind of struggles? Nothing dramatic, Coleman cautioned. Just the normal adjustment issues that many veterans face. The therapy sessions are completely confidential, of course, and there's nothing in her record to suggest any serious problems. She's handling her transition better than most people in her situation. But Marcus had latched onto this information like a lifeline. Perhaps Sarah Martinez wasn't as invulnerable as she seemed. Perhaps there were ways to exploit the challenges she was facing in civilian life. I want you to keep investigating, he told Coleman. Find out more about these therapy sessions, about any problems she might be having. Coleman shook his head. Mr. Webb, I can't do that. What you're asking for would involve breaching doctor-patient confidentiality, possibly illegally obtaining medical records. I won't do that kind of work. I'll pay double your usual rate, Marcus offered. It's not about money, Coleman replied firmly. It's about ethics and legality. What you're describing could be considered stalking or harassment. I won't be part of that. Coleman stood up and put on his jacket. My advice remains the same. Forget about Sarah Martinez and move on with your life. She's not someone you want to cross, and continuing down this path is only going to cause problems for you. After Coleman left, Marcus sat alone in the coffee shop, staring at the citation on his phone and thinking about everything he had learned. Sarah Martinez wasn't just some random woman he had encountered on the subway. She was a highly trained former military officer with connections and skills that made her a formidable opponent. But instead of deterring him, this knowledge only fueled his anger and frustration. He had been humiliated by someone who was apparently far more capable and accomplished than he had imagined. The rational response would have been to accept Coleman's advice and move on, but Marcus Webb had never been particularly good at accepting defeat. He began to develop a plan that would prove to be the biggest mistake of his professional life. 2 weeks after his meeting with Ray Coleman, Marcus Webb made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of his life and career. Unable to let go of his humiliation and frustrated by the private investigators' refusal to dig deeper into Sarah Martinez's personal life, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. His plan was both simple and devastatingly stupid. If he couldn't find leverage against Sarah through conventional means, he would create problems for her new business. Marcus had connections throughout the New York legal and business community, and he intended to use those connections to damage Sarah's reputation and sabotage her consulting firm. The first step in his campaign was to spread carefully crafted rumors about Sarah's reliability and mental state. During conversations at the athletic club where many of Henderson and Associates' clients worked out, Marcus began dropping hints about Sarah's company. He would mention, seemingly casually, that he had heard concerning things about Martinez Security Solutions. "I heard she's having some adjustment problems after leaving the military," he would say to potential clients. "You know how some of these veterans struggle with civilian life. Might not be the most stable choice for security consulting." Marcus was careful to never make direct accusations that could be traced back to him. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that Sarah's military background might actually be a liability rather than an asset. He implied that her experience was more theoretical than practical, that her firm was too new and untested to handle serious corporate security needs. The rumors began to spread through New York's interconnected business community with the efficiency that Marcus had hoped for. Several companies that had been considering hiring Sarah's firm began having second thoughts. A few existing clients started asking more pointed questions about her background and qualifications. Sarah first became aware that something was wrong when a major client, a pharmaceutical company that she had been working with for 6 weeks, abruptly canceled their contract. The company's security director, a man named David Chun whom Sarah had developed a good working relationship with, seemed uncomfortable when he called to end their arrangement. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Chun had said. "The decision came from higher up in the organization. They've decided to go with a more established firm. Can you tell me what changed?" Sarah asked. "I thought our security assessment was exactly what you were looking for." Chun hesitated. "There were some concerns raised about your company's stability and experience level. I tried to argue that your military background more than made up for any lack of civilian experience, but—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Sarah sensed there was more to the story, but Chun was obviously not willing to share the details. After ending the call, she sat in her small office wondering what could have caused such a sudden change in attitude. The pattern repeated itself over the next week. Another client postponed a planned project indefinitely, citing budget concerns that Sarah knew were fabricated. A third client asked for additional references and background information that they had never requested before. Most concerning of all, Sarah began receiving calls from potential clients who seemed to know details about her personal life that weren't public information. One caller mentioned that he had heard she was having difficulty adjusting to civilian life. Another asked pointed questions about her mental health and whether her military experience might make her too aggressive for corporate consulting work. Sarah's military training had taught her to recognize patterns and identify threats, and it was becoming clear that someone was deliberately targeting her business. But she had no idea who might be behind the campaign or why someone would want to sabotage her consulting firm. The breakthrough came when a business contact, a former Army colleague named Michael Torres who now worked in corporate security for a major bank, called to warn her about the rumors that were circulating. "Sarah, I don't know what's going on, but someone is spreading some nasty stories about you," Torres said. "I've heard 3 different people in the last week mention concerns about your company's reliability." "What kind of concerns?" Sarah asked. "The usual garbage about veterans having adjustment problems, questions about your mental health, suggestions that your military experience doesn't translate to civilian security work. It's all nonsense, but people are talking." Torres paused before continuing. "The weird thing is, these rumors all seem to be coming from the same general area, lawyers and business people who work in Midtown. Someone with connections in that community is definitely orchestrating this." That information gave Sarah her first real lead. She began thinking back through her recent interactions, looking for anyone who might have both the motivation and the connections to damage her business reputation. It didn't take long for her to remember Marcus Webb and their subway encounter. Sarah's approach to investigating Marcus was methodical and professional, drawing on skills she had developed during her military intelligence career. Unlike Marcus's heavy-handed attempt to dig into her background, Sarah focused on publicly available information and legitimate business intelligence gathering. What she discovered was both predictable and disappointing. Marcus Webb was exactly what he had appeared to be during their subway encounter, a privileged lawyer who was used to getting his way and didn't handle challenges to his authority well. His social media presence revealed a pattern of entitled behavior and casual cruelty toward people he considered beneath him. More importantly, Sarah was able to trace the rumors about her company back to Marcus through a combination of social network analysis and careful questioning of her business contacts. Several people mentioned hearing concerns about her company from a lawyer at Henderson and Associates, and it wasn't difficult to connect those comments to Marcus's campaign against her. Sarah's first instinct was to confront Marcus directly, but her military training had taught her the importance of gathering complete intelligence before taking action. She decided to document Marcus's harassment campaign thoroughly before deciding how to respond. Over the next week, Sarah carefully tracked the spread of rumors about her company. She identified the specific venues where Marcus was spreading his misinformation, documented the financial impact on her business, and began building a comprehensive case that demonstrated the deliberate nature of his actions. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been systematically contacting potential clients, spreading false information about Sarah's mental health and professional capabilities, and using his position at a prestigious law firm to lend credibility to his lies. His campaign had already cost Sarah thousands of dollars in lost business and was threatening the long-term viability of her consulting firm. But Sarah also discovered something that Marcus probably didn't realize. His actions were potentially criminal. By deliberately spreading false information to damage her business reputation, he was engaging in a form of defamation that could result in both civil and criminal liability. More problematically for Marcus, his campaign against Sarah violated several of Henderson and Associates' professional conduct policies. The law firm had strict rules about using the company's reputation for personal vendettas, and Marcus's behavior could easily be construed as bringing the firm into disrepute. Armed with this information, Sarah began developing a response that would be both decisive and devastating. But before implementing her plan, she decided to give Marcus one last chance to end his harassment campaign voluntarily. Sarah arranged to meet Marcus at a coffee shop near his office, using a mutual business contact to set up what appeared to be a routine networking meeting. Marcus agreed to the meeting, probably thinking it was an opportunity to gather more intelligence about his target. When Marcus arrived at the coffee shop, he found Sarah waiting at a corner table with a manila folder in front of her. She was wearing a professional business suit and had adopted the same calm, controlled demeanor that had unnerved him during their subway encounter. "Thank you for meeting with me," Sarah said as Marcus sat down across from her. "I think we need to discuss the situation that's developed between us." Marcus tried to maintain an air of confused innocence. "I'm not sure what situation you're referring to. This is the first time we've spoken since that unfortunate incident on the subway." Sarah opened the manila folder and spread out several documents on the table. "Actually, you've been talking about me quite a bit over the past few weeks. To my clients, to potential clients, to anyone who will listen." Marcus glanced at the documents and felt a chill run down his spine. The papers appeared to be a detailed timeline of his activities over the past month, complete with dates, locations, and summaries of conversations he thought had been private. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table between them. "I'm recording this conversation, just so we're both clear about what's being said." "You can't record me without my consent," Marcus protested. "Actually, New York is a one-party consent state," Sarah replied calmly. "I only need my own consent to record our conversation. But I'm telling you about it anyway, just to be fair." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her military bearing becoming more apparent. "Marcus, for the past 3 weeks, you've been systematically spreading false information about my company and my mental health. You've contacted my clients, potential clients, and business contacts with lies designed to damage my reputation and destroy my business." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Marcus said, but he was clearly rattled. Sarah pulled out another document. This is a detailed report documenting your harassment campaign. It includes witness statements from people you've spoken to, financial records showing the damage to my business, and social media evidence of your activities. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. What you've been doing isn't just unethical, Marcus. It's illegal. Defamation, business interference, harassment. And it's also a serious violation of your law firm's professional conduct policies. Marcus stared at the documents, realizing that his carefully orchestrated campaign had been completely exposed. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to stop," Sarah said simply. "I want you to cease all contact with my clients and business associates. I want you to stop spreading lies about me and my company. And I want you to understand that if this behavior continues, I will take legal action that will end your career." "You're threatening me," Marcus said, trying to regain some of his earlier bluster. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm informing you of the consequences of your actions. You chose to target someone with my background and experience, and now you're learning why that was a mistake." Sarah stood up and gathered her documents. "You have 24 hours to contact everyone you've spoken to about my company and retract your statements. If you don't, I'll be filing complaints with the New York State Bar Association, your employer, and the district attorney's office." As she turned to leave, Sarah paused and looked back at Marcus. "You tried to trip me on a subway platform because you thought it would be amusing to humiliate a stranger. Now you've spent 3 weeks trying to destroy my business because your little prank backfired. At what point do you plan to start acting like an adult?" Marcus sat alone in the coffee shop after Sarah left, staring at the digital recorder she had deliberately left on the table. He realized that his situation had become far more serious than he had anticipated, but his wounded pride was still preventing him from making the rational choice. Marcus Webb stared at the digital recorder for nearly 10 minutes after Sarah left the coffee shop. His rational mind understood that he was in serious trouble and that the smart thing to do would be to follow Sarah's instructions exactly. He should contact everyone he had spoken to about her company, retract his statements, and hope that would be enough to avoid the legal and professional consequences she had outlined. But Marcus's ego wouldn't let him accept such a complete capitulation. The thought of admitting to colleagues and business contacts that he had been spreading false information about Sarah Martinez was humiliating. Even worse was the prospect of explaining why he had been targeting her in the first place. Instead of doing the rational thing, Marcus decided to double down on his campaign against Sarah. He convinced himself that her threats were empty, that she was bluffing about taking legal action. After all, he was a lawyer at one of New York's most prestigious firms. She was just a former soldier trying to build a consulting business. Surely he had more resources and connections than she did. Marcus's first mistake was underestimating Sarah's connections within the business community. His second mistake was failing to understand that her military background had given her access to networks and resources that went far beyond what most people could imagine. Within hours of their coffee shop meeting, Sarah began implementing a response that was both methodical and devastating. Unlike Marcus's crude rumor-spreading campaign, Sarah's approach was sophisticated, professional, and completely legal. Her first step was to contact David Chun, the security director at the pharmaceutical company who had canceled their contract. Sarah called Chun directly and explained that she had discovered the source of the false information that had led to their contract cancellation. "David, I need you to know that the concerns you heard about my company came from someone who has been deliberately spreading false information as part of a personal vendetta," Sarah told him. "I have documented evidence of this harassment campaign, and I wanted you to be aware of the situation." Chen was initially skeptical, but when Sarah offered to share her documentation with him, his attitude changed quickly. The evidence she had gathered was comprehensive and damning, clearly showing Marcus's deliberate campaign to damage her reputation. "Jesus, Sarah," Chen said after reviewing her report. "This guy really went after you. I'm sorry we got caught up in this." The rumors seemed credible because they were coming from someone at Henderson and Associates. "I understand completely," Sarah replied. That's exactly what he was counting on, using his firm's reputation to give credibility to his lies. Chen paused for a moment. "You know, if you're still available, we'd like to reinstate our contract. What that lawyer did was completely unethical, and we don't want to be part of it." Similar conversations took place throughout the day as Sarah systematically contacted everyone who had been affected by Marcus's misinformation campaign. Her approach was professional and factual, focusing on the documented evidence rather than emotional appeals. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. But Sarah's real stroke of genius was her decision to send a detailed report about Marcus's harassment campaign to the senior partners at Henderson and Associates. Law firms take professional conduct violations seriously, especially when they involve using the firm's reputation for personal vendettas. The report Sarah sent to Henderson and Associates was a masterpiece of professional documentation. It included a detailed timeline of Marcus's activities, witness statements from multiple business contacts, financial records showing the damage to her company, and clear evidence that Marcus had been using his position at the firm to lend credibility to his false statements. More damaging still was Sarah's analysis of how Marcus's behavior violated the firm's professional conduct policies. She had clearly done her research, citing specific sections of the firm's ethics guidelines and professional standards that Marcus had violated. The senior partner who received Sarah's report, a woman named Patricia Henderson, who was one of the firm's founding members, read it with growing alarm and anger. Henderson and Associates had built its reputation over 40 years by maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct. Marcus Webb's behavior threatened to damage that reputation in ways that could take years to repair. Patricia Henderson called an emergency meeting with the firm's other senior partners for that same afternoon. By the end of the meeting, Marcus Webb's fate at the firm had been sealed. Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely unaware of the storm that was gathering around him. He spent Wednesday morning continuing his campaign against Sarah, making additional calls to potential clients, and spreading more false information about her company. His reckoning came at 2:30 p.m. when Patricia Henderson's assistant called to request his immediate presence in the senior partner's office. Marcus assumed it was about one of his ongoing cases and walked into the meeting with his usual confidence. That confidence evaporated the moment he saw Sarah's report spread out on Henderson's desk. "Marcus," Patricia Henderson began, her voice cold and controlled. "We need to discuss your recent activities regarding Sarah Martinez and her consulting firm." Marcus felt his stomach drop, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Patricia." Henderson held up Sarah's report. "This is a detailed documentation of a harassment and defamation campaign that you've been conducting against Ms. Martinez for the past 3 weeks. A campaign in which you've been using this firm's name and reputation to give credibility to false statements." "That's completely false," Marcus protested. "I have no idea where these allegations are coming from, but they're not true." Henderson opened the report to a page containing witness statements. "Ms. Martinez has statements from 6 different people who heard you spreading false information about her company. People who specifically remember you identifying yourself as being from Henderson and Associates." She turned to another page. "She also has documentation showing that your false statements have caused significant financial damage to her business, and a legal analysis showing that your behavior constitutes defamation, business interference, and harassment." Marcus realized that his situation was far worse than he had imagined. "Patricia, even if some of these allegations are true, this is a personal matter that has nothing to do with the firm." "Nothing to do with the firm?" Henderson's voice rose slightly. "You've been using our firm's name and reputation to conduct a personal vendetta against a military veteran who was trying to build a legitimate business. How exactly does that have nothing to do with us?" Henderson stood up and walked around her desk to face Marcus directly. "Marcus, in 40 years of practicing law, I have never seen such a blatant violation of professional ethics from one of our attorneys. What you've done isn't just unethical, it's criminal." "Criminal?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Defamation, business interference, harassment," Henderson listed. "Ms. Martinez would be well within her rights to file both civil and criminal charges against you. And, frankly, after reading this report, I wouldn't blame her." Henderson returned to her desk and picked up another document. "This is your termination letter, Marcus. Your employment with Henderson and Associates is terminated immediately for gross professional misconduct." Marcus stared at the termination letter in shock. "You can't fire me over this. I have cases pending, clients depending on me." "Your cases will be reassigned," Henderson replied coolly. Your clients will be informed that you are no longer with the firm. And you need to understand that we will not be providing you with any references or recommendations for future employment. Patricia, please, Marcus said, his professional composure finally cracking. This is all because of one incident on a subway platform. The woman humiliated me in front of dozens of people. I was just trying to level the playing field. Henderson looked at him with something approaching disgust. Level the playing field? Marcus, you tried to destroy the livelihood of a woman who spent 12 years serving her country, including 4 years coordinating special operations missions. A woman who has more integrity and professionalism in her little finger than you've shown in your entire career. She gestured toward the door. Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be packed and sent to you. And, Marcus, I strongly suggest that you contact Ms. Martinez immediately and apologize for what you've done. Because if she decides to pursue legal action against you, this firm will not be providing you with any assistance or support. As Marcus was escorted from the building by security, he finally began to understand the full scope of his mistakes. He had targeted someone who was not only more capable and better connected than he had realized, but who also possessed the skills and knowledge to systematically dismantle his life and career. The story of Marcus Webb's downfall spread quickly through New York's legal community. The details of his harassment campaign against Sarah Martinez became a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting personal grudges override professional judgment. For Sarah, the resolution of the situation brought both satisfaction and reflection. She had successfully defended her business and reputation against a deliberate attack, but the experience had also reminded her of why she had devoted 12 years of her life to military service. The thing that bothered me most wasn't the attack on my business, Sarah later told a reporter who was writing about the incident. It was the casual cruelty of it. This man thought he could destroy someone's livelihood because his ego was bruised. That kind of attitude is exactly what I spent years fighting against overseas. Sarah's business not only recovered from Marcus's harassment campaign, but actually grew stronger as a result of it. The professional way she had handled the situation, combined with the revelation of her impressive military background, attracted new clients who were specifically seeking someone with her unique combination of skills and integrity. Marcus Webb, meanwhile, found himself facing a very different future than the one he had planned. No other major law firm in New York would hire him after word spread about his termination from Henderson and Associates. He eventually found work with a small personal injury firm in New Jersey, but his career aspirations of making partner at a prestigious Manhattan firm were permanently destroyed. The civil lawsuit that Sarah filed against Marcus was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that reportedly covered all of her lost business income, plus additional damages for emotional distress and reputation harm. Marcus was also required to issue formal written apologies to everyone he had contacted during his harassment campaign. Perhaps most importantly, the incident led to changes in how law firms monitor and address professional conduct violations. Henderson and Associates implemented new policies requiring partners to report any concerning behavior by associates, and several other firms adopted similar measures. The story became something of a legend in both military veteran circles and the New York business community. It was seen as a perfect example of how military training and discipline could translate successfully to civilian careers, and how attempting to bully someone with that kind of background was likely to backfire spectacularly. For Sarah Martinez, the entire experience reinforced her belief that the leadership and problem-solving skills she had developed during her military career were just as valuable in civilian life as they had been in combat zones. The man who had tried to trip her on a subway platform had inadvertently given her one of the best advertisements her consulting business could have asked for. Years later, when asked about the incident during interviews, Sarah would always emphasize the same point. Military service teaches you to assess threats, develop strategies, and execute plans under pressure. Those skills don't disappear when you put on civilian clothes. Marcus Webb learned that the hard way, but hopefully others can learn from his mistake without having to make it themselves. The incident also served as a reminder that the veterans returning to civilian life after years of military service bring with them capabilities and experience that go far beyond what might be apparent from their appearance or demeanor. Sarah Martinez looked like any other professional woman on a subway platform, but she carried with her 12 years of military training, leadership experience, and combat operations expertise. Marcus Webb's attempt to trip her had been meant as a casual bit of cruelty directed at what he assumed was a random stranger. Instead, he had targeted someone whose response would be swift, professional, and devastating. It was a mistake that cost him his career, his reputation, and his future prospects in ways that a simple subway prank could never have justified. In the end, the story of their encounter became a modern parable about the dangers of making assumptions about people based on superficial appearances, and the importance of treating everyone with basic respect and dignity. Because you never know when the person you're trying to trip might be someone who commanded combat operations for 12 years.